There is a silent rhythm in history. A six-beat sequence that has toppled empires, erased monarchies, and rewritten national destinies. It is not ideology. It is not culture. It is not left or right. It is a mathematical cycle, one that begins quietly in the wealth gap between classes, and ends loudly in the streets with governments collapsing in real time. And the most unsettling truth? In 2025, the United States is not drifting toward that cycle. It is moving through it, stage by stage, fracture by fracture, almost perfectly. Like an ancient script rediscovered and acted out once more. The same tensions are rising, the same institutions are eroding. And the same belief, our system can fix itself, is fading from the minds of millions. We've seen this movie 3 times in the past 250 years. And each time, the ending was the same. France, 1789, the collapse no one believed possible. In 1789, France wasn't a failing nation. It was the cultural heart of Europe. A beacon of art, philosophy, scientific progress, and imperial pride. If you lived in Paris that year, you would have seen palaces glowing with candlelight, aristocrats debating Enlightenment ideals, scientists pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. France appeared eternal, an 800-year monarchy surrounded by prestige and wealth. And yet, in just 5 years, that glittering world would be unrecognizable. The government destroyed. The monarchy abolished. The king beheaded by guillotine. And the nation plunged into the terror, where 40,000 people were executed in the name of purification. The chaos seemed spontaneous. Sudden. But from a distance, the pattern is unmistakable. Russia, 1917, the empire that died in 8 months. By 1917, Russia was one of the largest empires on Earth. 180 million people, spanning 11 time zones, ruled by a dynasty that had lasted 3 centuries. It looked immovable. But beneath the imperial facade was a rot so deep that a single spark, a bread riot in Petrograd, ignited an avalanche that even the army refused to stop. 8 months later, the Tsar abdicated. His family was executed. The Bolsheviks seized power. And civil war would soon claim 20 million lives. The Romanovs didn't fall because their enemies were strong. They fell because their institutions were hollow. Structures that looked solid until touched. A pattern repeating. Cuba, 1959, a modern society that fell in 2 years. Cuba was not a medieval empire or a starving monarchy. In the 1950s, it was one of Latin America's most prosperous nations. Tourists filled Havana's casinos. American investment flowed freely. A growing middle class believed the future would be brighter than the past. But prosperity can mask instability. And within 2 years, Batista fled with hundreds of millions of dollars. Castro's forces entered Havana. And the island transformed into a communist dictatorship that would last nearly 60 years. 3 revolutions. 3 different continents. 3 different eras. 1 identical 6-stage sequence. And here's the twist: history repeats every time. The elites, the ones with the most to lose, never recognized the danger until it was too late. They believed the people would never rebel. The institutions were too strong. The system was too stable. They were wrong. Every time. What a revolution really is, and what it is not. Before we break down the 6 stages, we need to clarify a misconception. A revolution is not a protest, a riot, a political swing from left to right or right to left. Those are surface disturbances. A revolution is structural demolition. It is when the existing order, its laws, institutions, legitimacy, is not merely replaced but obliterated. Contrary to popular belief, revolutions do not erupt because people are poor. Poverty has existed for millennia without sparking revolt. Revolutions ignite when expectations outgrow reality. The middle class, those who should be stable, begin to sink. The gap between elite privilege and common struggle becomes intolerable. The belief that the system can self-correct collapses. As President John F. Kennedy warned, those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. History does not just agree, it screams this truth. Stage 1, the seed, extreme wealth inequality. Every major revolution begins before a single shot is fired. It begins with the numbers. France in 1789. 1.5% of the population owned 35% of the land and paid zero taxes. Meanwhile, 98.5% carried the nation on their back. Russia in 1917. A feudal hierarchy in everything but name. Nobles owning endless estates, peasants owning nothing. Cuba in 1959. A glittering Havana hiding rural poverty, corporate exploitation. And a regime funneling wealth upward. Inequality alone doesn't cause revolution. Humanity has always lived unevenly. But extreme, visible inequality creates a moral fracture. A sense that the system is not merely imperfect, but designed for someone else. This is the foundation of every collapse. Stage 2, the rot, government corruption and incompetence. In all three revolutions, the moment inequality became intolerable. The government could have acted. But it didn't. France's monarchy kept borrowing and raising taxes while nobles refused to sacrifice. Russia's Tsar clung to divine right as the economy imploded and millions died in war. Cuba's Batista sold the country to mobsters, rigged elections, and ruled through torture. Governments collapse not because a nation is struggling, but because its institutions stop serving the people. When those in power appear insulated, corrupt, or indifferent, legitimacy evaporates, and with it, obedience. Stage 3, the break, middle class radicalized. Revolutions never start with the poorest. They start with the people who expected stability, and instead found decline. France. Lawyers, merchants, intellectuals. Russia. Students, professionals, disillusioned officers. Cuba. A young, educated lawyer named Fidel Castro. And thousands of middle-class supporters. When those who were supposed to inherit the system begin questioning it, the structure weakens from the inside. This is the moment every ruling class ignores. And the moment that seals their fate. Stage 4, the point of no return, loss of faith in institutions. Once people stop believing that courts deliver justice, that elections reflect truth, that police protect them, that the government listens, the social contract fractures. This is the stage where revolutions become inevitable. Not because people want chaos, but because they no longer believe peaceful change is possible. This is where the United States stands today, in 2025. The same stage that France, Russia, and Cuba reached. Right before everything snapped. And history says stages 5 and 6 come fast. Very fast. To understand the modern cycle, we need to revisit the revolution that became the blueprint for all that followed, France, 1789, the mother of modern political upheaval. By the late 1780s, France looked invincible from the outside. Paris set the tone for art, literature, diplomacy, even fashion. French thinkers had shaped the Enlightenment, Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot. Voices that inspired revolutions abroad while their own homeland teetered on the edge. But beneath the salons and symphonies, the fundamentals were cracking. Stage 1, inequality reaches the breaking point. France was divided into 3 estates. But the word division barely captures what it really was. The first estate, clergy. 10% of the land. Paid zero taxes. The second estate, nobility. 25% of the land. Paid almost zero taxes. The Third Estate, everyone else. 98.5% of the population. Carried the entire tax burden. This was not inequality, it was extraction. And when disaster struck, a series of poor harvests. The consequences became catastrophic. Bread was 80 to 90% of a peasant's expenses. When prices doubled due to famine, families didn't just tighten belts. They starved. Meanwhile at Versailles, the nobility continued. Hunting on peasant land. Feasting through multi-course dinners. Performing rituals of luxury as if they lived in a different universe. This wasn't merely an economic divide. It was a psychic one, two realities that could not coexist forever. Stage 2, corruption and incompetence take center stage. Louis XVI wasn't a villain, he was a symbol of structural decay. A gentle man in a brutal position. France was drowning in debt from the 7 Years' War. Its intervention in the American Revolution. And centuries of royal excess. Yet the king's answer was always the same. Borrow more. Raise taxes on those already crushed. Protect the privileges of those who contributed nothing. Whenever reforms were proposed, the nobility blocked them. Even if it meant national bankruptcy. This is where corrupt states collapse. Not because they intend to fail, but because their elites refuse to sacrifice. A dying system chooses self-preservation over national survival every time. Stage 3, the middle class becomes the vanguard. Louis summoned the Estates General in 1789, the first time in 175 years. He hoped it would rubber-stamp new taxes. Instead, he awakened a force he could not control. The Third Estate, filled with lawyers, merchants, urban professionals, demanded voting reform. They wanted one vote per person, not the rigged system that gave the clergy and nobility a 2-to-1 advantage. When Louis refused, they broke away and formed the National Assembly. Locked out of their chamber, they gathered in an indoor tennis court. Pledging, "We will not disband until France has a constitution." This moment, the tennis court oath, is the hinge of the entire revolution. Not peasants, not mobs. But the educated class declaring the system illegitimate. Every revolution in history accelerates from this exact moment. Stage 4, institutions lose legitimacy. The monarchy, the church, the courts. All pillars of French society, began to crumble in public perception. Then came the spark. July 14, 1789. Parisians stormed the Bastille. A prison with few inmates but enormous symbolic weight. The fortress of royal authority. The mob killed the guards. Seized weapons. Paraded severed heads through the streets. The world changed that day. Fear shifted sides. Once institutions appear powerless, the psychological contract between rulers and ruled dissolves. Stage 5, radicals capture the momentum. Power didn't shift to moderates. It shifted to the Jacobins. A disciplined, uncompromising ideological force led by Maximilien Robespierre. They promised equality, justice, retribution, and a future purified of corruption. And the masses followed because the moderates failed to deliver bread, peace, or relief. When reasonable reforms collapse, the crowd listens to unreasonable solutions. Stage 6, overthrow and chaos, the terror. January 1793. King Louis XVI is executed by guillotine. October 1793. Marie Antoinette follows. What began as a constitutional movement descends into the reign of terror. The Committee of Public Safety executes nobles, priests, political rivals, moderates, even fellow Jacobins deemed insufficiently pure. 40,000 people die in under 2 years. Trials become formalities. Accusation becomes evidence. The guillotine becomes the heartbeat of the revolution. Robespierre himself is executed by the same tribunal he empowered. Proving the dark truth of revolutions. They consume their creators. By 1799, France is exhausted, economically, socially, spiritually. Into this vacuum steps Napoleon Bonaparte. A military genius who promises order after a decade of chaos. The revolution that began with the cry Liberté, égalité, fraternité, ends with a dictator crowning himself emperor. And leading Europe into 15 years of war. The lesson is simple and chilling. Revolutions rarely deliver freedom. They deliver new power, often more brutal than the old. Russia 1917, the pattern repeats with terrifying speed. Now jump ahead 128 years. Russia in 1917 looks nothing like France in 1789. Different century, different culture, different ideology. And yet, the same 6 stages unfold with eerie precision. Stage 1, Inequality in a feudal empire. Despite the facade of imperial glory, Russia remained medieval. The Tsar and the nobles owned everything. Peasants, 80% of the population, owned virtually nothing. Industrial workers labored 12 to 14 hours for starvation wages. Safety laws didn't exist. Children worked in factories. The inequality wasn't just severe. It was structural, part of the national DNA. When inequality feels permanent, rage becomes generational. Stage 2, Corruption and catastrophic leadership. Nicholas II believed he ruled by divine right. That belief alone doomed the empire. When peaceful demonstrators marched to the Winter Palace in 1905 to petition for safer working conditions, troops opened fire. Bloody Sunday shattered the illusion of a benevolent monarchy. Then Russia entered World War I. And disaster became destiny. Millions of soldiers died. Many fought without boots, rifles, or ammunition. Entire divisions surrendered simply because there were no bullets. The Tsar's government wasn't merely incompetent, it was delusional. And revolutions feast on delusion. Stage 3, the middle class and the military turn. By early 1917, bread lines stretched for blocks. Women rioted for food. Workers joined them. Then soldiers. And here is the moment every regime fears. The army refused to shoot. Once the military defects. The government's life expectancy is measured in days. The Duma forced Nicholas II to abdicate. A 300-year dynasty ended quietly, almost anticlimactically. A sign of how hollow the structure had become. The new provisional government promised reform. But made the fatal mistake of keeping Russia in the war. They misread the moment. They misunderstood the public. And in revolutions, misreading the moment is lethal. We left Russia in early 1917, standing on a knife's edge. The Tsar was gone. A provisional government had taken power. But the cycle of revolution doesn't pause, it accelerates. And in Russia, it accelerated with devastating speed. Russia 1917, continued, Stage 4, Loss of faith in institutions. The provisional government's legitimacy eroded almost instantly. It couldn't end the war, feed the people, stabilize the economy, or regain control of the military. Every institution, parliament, the courts, the ministries, looked paralyzed, fragile, temporary. A government can survive unpopularity. It cannot survive irrelevance. And into that vacuum stepped a man who understood the psychology of collapse better than any ruler of his time. Vladimir Lenin. Stage 5, Revolutionary movement gains mass support. Lenin didn't need complexity. He needed clarity. He offered 3 words. Peace. Land. Bread. A slogan sharp enough to cut through the chaos. To a starving soldier, it meant going home alive. To a peasant, it meant owning the land they worked. To a worker, it meant escaping famine and exhaustion. The Bolsheviks didn't become powerful because their ideology was popular. They became powerful because their opponents were failing. And revolutions are not won by those who are loved, but by those who are feared less than the collapsing regime. On October 25, 1917, the Bolsheviks launched a coup so swift and coordinated that Petrograd barely realized a revolution had occurred. They stormed the Winter Palace. They arrested the provisional government. Lenin declared Soviet power. The takeover took less than a day. But the darkness that followed would last decades. Stage 6, Overthrow and Chaos, the Civil War. What began almost bloodlessly exploded into one of the deadliest civil wars in human history. The Bolsheviks, the Reds, faced the Whites. Monarchists, liberals, foreign armies, and internal dissidents. To maintain control, Lenin's secret police, the Cheka, unleashed a reign of terror even harsher than France's. Executions without trial. Entire villages destroyed. Anyone suspected of disloyalty was eliminated. In July 1918, the Tsar's entire family, including children, was executed in a basement. A symbolic severing of Russia's past. By 1922, 10 million people were dead. The economy shattered. Famine swept the land. And the Soviet Union was born. The revolution that promised liberation delivered a dictatorship that would later evolve into Stalin's terror. With 20 million more deaths in purges, famines, and gulags. Different continent. Different ideology. Same six-stage sequence. Cuba 1959, a prosperous paradise with a rotting core. Our third example is the most surprising because it breaks the stereotype. Cuba wasn't a feudal empire or a medieval monarchy. It was modern. A Caribbean economy rising on tourism, casinos, American investment. And a thriving middle class. Havana was glamorous, cosmopolitan, alive. But prosperity does not equal stability. And beneath the neon lights lay the familiar cracks. Stage 1, Extreme Wealth Inequality. The wealth of 1950s Cuba wasn't earned by the nation. It was extracted by Batista's political cronies, American corporations, and organized crime syndicates. In Havana, the wealthy dined under chandeliers. Casinos flowed with cash. Mobsters and elites traded favors. But in the countryside, children had no schools. Families had no doctors. Sugar workers lived one harvest away from starvation. When inequality becomes geographic. When one city glows while the rest of the nation goes dark. Revolutionaries don't have to persuade anyone. Reality does the persuading for them. Stage 2, Government corruption and brutality. Fulgencio Batista seized power in a 1952 coup. And turned Cuba into a kleptocracy. Corruption wasn't hidden, it was the system. Police were bought. Courts were rigged. Opponents disappeared in the night. Torture chambers operated with impunity. Foreign mafia bosses ran the casinos with Batista's blessing, paying him a share while the public saw none of the profits. Revolutions ignite when citizens no longer believe the state represents them. In Cuba, Batista represented no one but himself. Stage 3, Middle class radicalized. Enter Fidel Castro. A young lawyer from a wealthy family. Educated, articulate, ambitious. He could have joined the elite. Instead, he chose rebellion. When he attacked the Moncada barracks in 1953, he failed spectacularly. But at his trial, he delivered the speech that electrified a generation. History will absolve me. Batista imprisoned him, then released him. Believing Castro was harmless. He miscalculated. Radicalized middle-class leaders are the engine of revolutions. People too educated to submit. And too disillusioned to compromise. Castro was exactly that. Stage 4, Loss of Faith in Institutions. Castro and his tiny band returned to Cuba in 1956. On a boat called Granma. Most were killed in an ambush. Only 20 survived. By all logic, the revolution should have ended there. But Batista's brutality created more revolutionaries than Castro ever could. Every tortured student added 10 more to the cause. Every burned village pushed peasants toward the rebels. Every act of corruption deepened national disgust. Even the United States, Batista's main backer, began distancing itself. When your foreign sponsor abandons you, you have entered the terminal phase of collapse. Stage 5, Revolution gains mass support. By 1958, Castro had thousands of fighters, urban resistance networks, and the support of peasants who saw him as their protector. Batista's soldiers defected. Officers stole what they could and fled. The regime disintegrated from within. As all collapsing governments do. On January 1, 1959, Batista escaped with $300 million. 8 days later, Castro marched into Havana. To cheering crowds and worldwide admiration. The pattern was complete. But the tragedy was only beginning. Stage 6, Overthrow and Chaos, the dictatorship revealed. Castro promised democracy. Instead, political opponents were executed. Journalists silenced. Businesses nationalized. And dissent criminalized. Within months, Cuba became a one-party communist state. With a security apparatus modeled after the Soviet Union. The revolution that overthrew a dictator installed a new one. This is the final truth the pattern always delivers. Revolutions do not replace the system. They reset it with new rulers who repeat the same human failings. Often more intensely than those they replaced. France descended into terror. Russia into civil war and totalitarianism. Cuba into 60 years of repression. 3 different centuries. 3 different worlds. The same 6 stages every time. We've examined France, Russia, and Cuba, 3 revolutions separated by centuries, continents, ideologies. And yet, each one followed the same 6-stage arc with near-perfect consistency. Now, we're going to break down the pattern clearly. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you map that pattern onto the United States in 2025, the alarms become deafening. Let's decode the cycle. The 6-stage revolution. Patrn. Stage 1, Extreme wealth inequality. Every revolution begins long before a mob storms a palace or a dictator flees by night. It begins when wealth concentrates so intensely that society begins to split into 2 realities. France. Clergy and nobility paid nothing. Peasants paid everything. Russia. Nobles held the land, peasants lived in feudal bondage. Cuba. Batista's elite and foreign corporations absorbed the nation's wealth. History tolerates inequality. But it does not tolerate insulting inequality, the kind visible from the street, the kind flaunted in the face of struggle. That visibility breeds resentment. And resentment is the fuel of revolution. Stage 2, Government corruption and incompetence. The second stage is where systems rot from within. France. Louis XVI's court resisted all reform. The financial crisis was ignored. Russia. Nicholas II clung to divine right while the nation starved and bled. Cuba. Batista's corruption was not rumor, it was policy. When government becomes self-serving, unresponsive, immune to accountability, Faith in the system begins to collapse. Corruption delegitimizes authority. Incompetence delegitimizes respect. And when authority and respect disappear, obedience follows. Stage 3, the middle class deteriorates and radicalizes. This is the hinge. The turning point. The moment all revolutions accelerate. Contrary to popular belief, revolutions are not led by the poorest. They are led by the educated middle class, the people who invested in the system, believed in the system, and feel betrayed by the system. France. Lawyers, merchants, intellectuals. Russia. Students, factory organizers, disillusioned officers. Cuba. Young urban professionals, Castro himself a lawyer. When the group that was supposed to rise discovers it is falling, the betrayal becomes emotional, moral, existential. And when the middle class turns against the system's collapse is no longer a possibility. It's a countdown. Stage 4, loss of faith in institutions. This is the point of no return. It's not about anger. It's about abandonment. The people stop believing that. Elections reflect their will. Courts deliver justice. Police enforce law impartially. Government represents them. When institutions lose legitimacy, even good decisions appear corrupt. Even honest leaders appear compromised. In this phase, society splits into parallel realities. Each side believing its enemies control the system. France. The Estates General was rejected, replaced by the National Assembly. Russia. Soldiers refused to defend the provisional government. Cuba. Batista's elections were universally dismissed as fake. And once institutions lose trust, there is no peaceful path forward. The social contract is shattered. This is where revolutions lock in. When collapse becomes a structural process rather than a political debate. Stage 5, revolutionary movements gain mass support. Stage 5 is not rebellion. It is replacement. This is when organized groups, often fringe, often radical, suddenly become viable options. France. The Jacobins offered uncompromising justice. Russia. The Bolsheviks promised peace, land, bread. Cuba. Castro's 26th of July movement promised dignity and reform. Revolutionary movements succeed not because they're beloved, but because their opponents are despised. People don't support radical solutions because they want extremism. They support them because every moderate solution has failed. Stage 6, government overthrown, chaos follows. This final stage unfolds differently in each country. But the themes rhyme perfectly. France. The Terror. Mass executions. Dictatorship under Napoleon. Russia. Civil War. Famine. Stalinist totalitarianism. Cuba. A new dictatorship replacing the old. Silenced opposition. Nationalized economy. The myth of revolution is liberation. The reality of revolution is reconfiguration, often toward more centralized and ruthless control. Revolutions do not create paradise. They create power vacuums. And power vacuums attract the most disciplined, most extreme actors. The United States in 2025, where the pattern matches. Now we map the 6 stages onto the modern United States. And the match is exact. Not similar. Not approximate. Exact. Let's break it down. Stage 1, Extreme Wealth Inequality Check. In 1980, the top 1% held 8% of U.S. wealth. Today they hold 32%, more than France before its revolution. The top 0.1% own more than the bottom 90% combined. Billionaires build private rockets while average Americans can't afford. Healthcare. Housing. Education. Or retirement. Just like pre-revolutionary societies. The wealth gap is no longer invisible. It's live-streamed. Stage 2, Government corruption and incompetence check. The U.S. government today suffers from a crisis of legitimacy. Congress approval, 15%. Trust in the Supreme Court, collapsing. Elections, half of the country believes they're rigged. Lobbyists write laws, corporations choose candidates. Insider trading by lawmakers is routine. The national debt, $36 trillion and rising. America isn't failing from a shortage of intelligence or resources. It's failing from political sclerosis. Just like France, Russia, and Cuba. Stage 3, Middle class destroyed and radicalized check. The American middle class, the anchor of societal stability, is being hollowed out. College prices have skyrocketed. Home ownership is out of reach for millions. Wage growth stagnates while asset prices soar. Healthcare bankrupts families. Young people drown in student debt. This generation is the first in U.S. history that statistically expects to be worse off than their parents. And just like France's lawyers, Russia's students, Cuba's young idealists, the educated class is losing faith and turning angry. This is where revolutions ignite. Stage 4, Loss of faith in institutions check in present. Here is the most dangerous truth. The United States is now firmly in Stage 4. Trust in media, police, courts, elections, federal agencies is at historic lows. Half the country believes the 2020 election was stolen. The other half believes January 6 was an attempted coup. Each side sees the other as existential threats. This is not disagreement. This is institutional divorce. And Stage 4 is the last phase before collapse becomes possible. All it takes is a spark. A contested election. A financial meltdown. A viral incident. An assassination. A breakdown in federal authority. The kindling is dry. And once Stage 5 begins, history says Stage 6 follows rapidly. Sometimes in months. We've followed the 6-stage pattern across 3 revolutions and 250 years. We've seen the same sequence rewrite nations with terrifying precision. And now we stand at the threshold of the final 2 stages. The ones no society wants to enter. And the ones no society has ever escaped once Stage 4 has taken hold. Let's examine what remains. Stage 5 and Stage 6. Not in France. Not in Russia. Not in Cuba. But in the United States of America, 2025. Stage 5, the rise of revolutionary movements, forming now. The United States is not yet in Stage 5. But every precondition is forming, loudly, visibly, undeniably. Stage 5 begins when fringe ideas become mainstream. When people no longer believe moderation can solve anything. And instead seek clarity through extremes. This is happening on both sides of America's political divide. On the left, there is rising support for aggressive wealth redistribution, nationalization of industries, massive taxation on billionaires, anti-capitalist rhetoric, hostility toward corporations and elites. This is not fringe anymore. It is being discussed in Congress, universities, news panels, TikTok feeds. And increasingly shapes how younger Americans think about power. The left's revolutionary narrative sounds strikingly like France in 1792. And Russia in 1917. The elites stole everything. We must take it back. This message scales easily, because it is simple, emotional, and morally framed. On the right. Meanwhile, the right grows increasingly supportive of strongman leaders, militarized responses to unrest, deep suspicion of elections, Rejection of federal authority. Calls for secession or national divorce. And the belief that institutions are captured and illegitimate. The right's revolutionary narrative resembles Russia's anti-government militias in 1917 and Cuba's anti-corruption rebellion in 1958. The system is corrupt. Only force can fix it. Neither side trusts the other. Neither side trusts the state. And neither side believes compromise is possible. This is Stage 5's fertile soil. The moment moderates lose control. Revolutions do not occur when extremists appear. They occur when moderates disappear. When the center collapses. The public is forced to choose between two uncompromising visions. Neither of which can coexist. This is how Stage 5 begins. One faction gains mass support. Rallies grow larger. Leaders emerge. Institutions weaken. Parallel power structures appear. It always starts quietly. Like the Jacobins organizing in Paris. Like the Bolsheviks printing underground newspapers. Like Castro hiding in the Sierra Maestra Mountains. Then the movement hits critical mass. History calls it a revolution. But mathematically, it's simply the center hitting zero. Stage 6, government overthrown, chaos follows, the final stage. This is the part Americans refuse to imagine. Because they believe the US is too stable, too wealthy, too exceptional to collapse. But the French believed the same. The Russians believed the same. The Cubans believed the same. Every collapsing system believed the same. Exceptionalism is always strongest right before the fall. So what would Stage 6 look like in America? We cannot know the exact sequence. But history gives us a library of possibilities. 1. Political violence escalates. Not riots. Not protests. Targeted, organized political violence. Assassinations. Bombings. Militia clashes. Attacks on government facilities. Armed standoffs. This is how the slide begins. Slowly at first. Then accelerating. 2. The military and police fragment. Every collapsing government experiences this. In France, factions of the army switched sides. In Russia, soldiers refused orders. In Cuba, officers defected en masse. In the US, fragmentation could look like National Guard units refusing federal commands. Sheriffs choosing sides. Military officers disagreeing over legitimacy. Intelligence agencies divided along political lines. Once enforcement fractures. The government's authority is symbolic, not real. 3. Supply chain disruption and economic breakdown. Revolutions destroy trust. And trust is the foundation of economic systems. A collapse could trigger food shortages. Fuel shortages. Bank runs. Market crashes. Credit freezes. Shutdown of interstate commerce. Remember. Civilizations run on invisible systems. And those systems run on belief. When belief dies, so does the economy. 4. Secession attempts or parallel governments. Stage 6 often produces competing centers of power. In the US, that could mean states refusing federal rulings. Governors ignoring Washington. Cities acting as autonomous zones. Rival leaders claiming legitimacy. This isn't fiction. It's the literal structure of every revolution. 5. Foreign interference. No major revolution happens in isolation. Russia and China, America's primary geopolitical rivals, would have every incentive to destabilize communication networks. Hack infrastructure. Fund insurgent groups. See strategic global influence while the US collapses inward. A weakened America benefits every authoritarian power on earth. 6. A new regime emerges, but not the one people wanted. Here is the most sobering truth. Revolution doesn't create freedom. It creates a vacuum. And vacuums are filled by the most disciplined, most organized, most extreme actors. This is why France got Napoleon. Russia got Stalin. Cuba got Castro. The people who ignite revolutions rarely survive them. The people who win revolutions rarely represent the masses. Stage 6 does not end with liberation. It ends with consolidation. A new order appears. And it is almost always tighter, harsher, and more authoritarian than the one that fell. The final warning: America is in stage 4, and stage 5 comes fast. 3 revolutions. 3 centuries. 3 continents. 1 repeating pattern. And the United States fits it. Stage 1, extreme inequality check. Stage 2, corruption and incompetence check. Stage 3, middle-class decline and radicalization check. Stage 4, loss of faith in institutions check. The US is here. Right now. And once a nation reaches stage 4, the timeline accelerates. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes months. Sometimes a single event triggers the plunge into stage 5. France had the Estates General breaking down. Russia had bread riots and military mutiny. Cuba had Batista's brutality becoming intolerable. America could have a contested election, a major recession, a viral police incident, a political assassination, a constitutional crisis. Any of these could ignite the transformation from distrust to revolt. Stage 5 is not guaranteed. But history says it's extremely difficult to avoid. Outro: the past is not prophecy. But it is pattern. The American story is not over. It may yet sidestep the abyss. Nations have reformed before collapse. Rarely, but not never. But ignoring the pattern will not save us. The past does not predict the future. But it warns us. It whispers through the ruins of Versailles. Through the ashes of Petrograd. Through the silent streets of Havana. It says, you are not unique. You are not immune. And the pattern does not care what you call yourself. If this opened your eyes to where we truly are in the cycle, then pay attention. Because when stage 5 arrives, when movements gain mass support, you will need to understand not just what is happening, but why. The answers are not hidden in tomorrow. They are carved into yesterday. History wrote the script. We are simply living the next act.